it's Courtney. Today I'm going to be using the stamp set Strangeness by Simon Says Stamp, and I'm going to be using the largest floral arrangement there in the stamp set. Using my Misty here because it is such a large image, and I'm going to be stamping on a piece of Bristol Smooth cardstock. This is cut down to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and I'm just kind of arranging that in the top left-hand corner. I'm going to treat my cardstock with the anti-static tool because I will be doing some heat embossing. I'll go ahead and stamp my image with Versamark ink. And I did apply a ton of pressure here because it's hard to see if you got a good impression with the clear ink. So I just gave it a ton of pressure and hoped for the best. And once that was done, I'm going to bring out some Wow embossing powder. This is a gold pearl, and I'll sprinkle that over the entire image and then go ahead and heat set that. I usually use a coffee filter to kind of catch the excess. That way I can just dump it right back in the little jar there. Once that was heat set, we'll move on to the coloring, and I'm going to be using my Zig Real or Clean Color markers. I always get that messed up. So I wanted to make this very, very colorful. The name of the stamp set is Strangeness. So we're going to color these kind of strange. So for the first flower, I'm going to be using two different colors. It's a pink color and a yellow color. And I'm going to put some of the yellow on the top and the pink towards the bottom where basically the darkest color, the darkest area would be rather, and where it's kind of folded over on itself. I'm using a number 4 round brush here, and it's just damp. So I'm dabbing most of it up on the paper towel and then bringing that to my paper and kind of just letting those two colors blend together. I just did one at a time, one petal at a time, just to make sure that I was getting the results that I was looking for. I didn't get that great of a blend. It didn't seem like the pink was really blending out that well. So I did go back in and add a little bit more pink to this particular petal and a little bit more water, and that seemed to do the trick. And I'll just keep that in mind when I move to the next petal. Now I am going to be working on petals that are not touching just while the paper is wet. The Bristol Smooth, because I'm not using a ton of water, it's not staying wet all that long, but I don't want to take any chances where for my colors bleeding into each other. And you do have the embossing, which will kind of prevent that as well, but I tend to be a little bit messy, so I didn't want to take any chances. But I'm basically going to go over all of these petals for this first flower the same way with the same two colors for the little parts that are kind of folded over on itself. I don't really have any rhyme or reason as far as where I'm putting the shading. I just want to make sure that I incorporate both of those colors and then blend those together. Now I'll show you just one more here and then we'll move on to the next color combination. This particular petal doesn't have any folds on it, so I'm just putting pink on the bottom and yellow on the top. And I start with the water where there is no pigment and then kind of bring that water down to where the pigment is and just let those blend out together. Sometimes you have to work at it a little bit more than other times, but overall they will blend pretty nicely. So for this next larger flower, I'm going to be coloring this pretty much the same way. Here I'm just kind of testing out the colors because these are new to me and I still haven't I haven't swatched them out yet. So I'm putting the purple on the bottom and this blue, it's kind of a bright blue on the top, but basically doing the same thing as I did with the pink and the yellow and starting off with that water where there is no pigment, bringing that down to the purple and then up to the blue and kind of letting those blend out. Again, had a little bit of a hard time getting that purple to blend out, so I did go back in and add more. I did find that I didn't have any problem adding more pigment while my paper was still wet with these. I know some watercolor pens and markers you're not able to do that with. I didn't have a problem with these. So I'll just show you one more petal here, and basically it's shaped very similar to the other ones with that little fold there. So I'm just doing a little bit of line, a little line of purple and a little line of the blue just to make sure I get both colors incorporated and blending the purple and the blue out just to make sure that they kind of, it's just an even flow, I guess. So once I got that color or that flower done, we'll move on to the leaves. Now I have two different greens here, and I found that I didn't really need to use both of them. So for this first leaf, I am using both. I wasn't sure whether I was going to use any water on these at all, but I'm just starting with the darkest color, putting down a little bit of a shadow where the leaf is folded over on itself and right there in the center. And then I did add just a little bit of water where that highlight would be. Then I realized that the two colors were so similar to one another, it didn't really matter. So I'm just going to be using the darkest color here, laying out the darkest areas underneath that little flap there where it's folded over and right there in the center, and then using that water to help that blend out, again, starting where there is no pigment first. Some of these images are kind of hanging off the paper because that's the way I stamped it, and it's hard to tell what's what when that happens. So just keep in mind, don't stress over it. If you can't tell what it is, neither can the recipient. So just color it the way you see fit, and nobody will know the difference. For these other two leaves, or these little tiny leaves, I'm coloring it with that lightest color and just adding a little bit of shading right there in the center, and I'm not using any water on those at all. Those are pretty small. I did notice that there are some, I think, they're leaves up here, so I just colored them as leaves. They may be part of the flower, but like I said, nobody's going to be able to tell the difference. For these other little flowers, there's three of them on either side of the larger flowers. I'm just going to be using one color here, and this is kind of like a blue-green color, and I'm just putting a little bit on the base of each of the petals, just a teeny tiny bit. And then I will go in with my damp paintbrush to blend that out, starting off at the tip of the petal and working my way down. And if I have to work my way back up, I will. I did switch over to a number 2 round brush just because I felt like I had a little bit more control over these smaller areas. But I colored the other two the exact same. And for the middle of the flowers, I'm just going in straight, no water or anything, with kind of like a tan color. You couldn't really even notice it kind of blended in with the embossing. So once my coloring was all done, I had a ton of white space. So I ended up, I didn't want to add too much. I didn't want to add a shadow or anything like that. So I ended up adding some splatters. So I'm taking some of the colors that I used in the flowers and I'm just scribbling them out on my acrylic block. And I'm just going to use my paper towel to somewhat mask off my image because I don't want the splatters to get on that. It doesn't have to be perfect. And then I'm just taking my damp paintbrush, picking up some of that pigment and splattering that around. This is the number 2 round brush, so your splatters are going to be pretty tiny. And I'm just doing that with the pink, the turquoise color, and the purple. And then I will move my paper towel just to get a few little splatters there in the top left-hand corner above the image itself. Once that was done, I did let that dry for just a few minutes. Like I said, this paper does dry pretty quickly. And then I went ahead and trimmed down my panel just a little bit on the right-hand side as well as the bottom. I wanted this to be just a little bit smaller than my A2 size card base. Then as far as the sentiment goes, I wasn't sure if I wanted to stamp this directly on my panel or if I wanted to pop this up. Ultimately, I did decide to pop it up. I felt like it would blend in too much if I didn't pop it up, if I didn't put it on some sort of color. So I went ahead and took some black cardstock and I treated that with my anti-static tool. This sentiment is pretty long, so you'll need a longer acrylic block for this. Stamp that out with my Versamark ink and use that same embossing powder. Now, the first time I stamped this, I must have had something on my fingers and I didn't get, I got a lot, very messy, I should say, on the beginning part of the sentiment. And these lines in the sentiment are so intricate that I wasn't able to take a paintbrush to take that away. So I ended up just stamping it on the other side. I wasn't going to try to fix that up. I probably would have ruined it anyway. So, like I said, sprinkled on that same gold pearl embossing powder and went ahead and heat set that. And I did trim this down to there's not too much of a border of the black around the sentiment itself, but I didn't want to just pop this up with just the black. So I wanted to use a color within one of those flowers. So I took a dark purple cardstock and I wanted to just kind of frame that, I guess you could say, frame the sentiment. And the easiest way that I find to do this is to adhere the sentiment strip right on the cardstock itself and then cut around it so that you have an even border around all four sides. So I'm going to use my Tombow Mono Multi Glue to adhere this flat to that cardstock, and then I'll bring out my tonic trimmer again and just take off the top and the right hand side, just trying my best to leave an even border. This makes it a lot easier so you don't have to measure it because you never know what size your sentiment's going to be. So this makes it easier without having to measure. So once that was done, I took some fun foam and my Tombow Mono Multi Glue to adhere my card panel down to my card base. And I just put this under my MISTI for a little while. It's heavy enough where it will, while the glue dries on the fun foam, it will dry flat. And then once that was dry, and I usually only give it maybe 5 minutes or so, if that, I went ahead and took some Scotch foam tape to the back of my sentiment strip and adhered that just to the bottom part of my card panel. I was going to add some shimmer, but I was too afraid that my pigment would on the flowers would move around too much. So I left it as is. That's it for today, guys. Thanks for stopping by.